All right, welcome back to the second half of this lab. In this lab, we're going to make 5 more visualizations using Tableau. For this one, I'd like you to open up the workbook that you've already been working in. So this is the Social Security Administration workbook, the one that you have all of the calculated fields. So if you go over here to your data source, you should have the first letter, the occurrences, the fixed sum, all of these fields that you calculated before. You should still have your dispersion plot. And if you remember, this is the male and female distribution through the years of like which one is dominant for each year. All right, we are going to get started by trying to answer some of our questions. So we're first curious about the distribution of first names in general. So this is all of the first names from 1900 to 1999. So 100 years of first names. We're going to use a tree map to illustrate that. This is also called an area chart. We also want to know for each name, what's the proportion of male or female? And we're going to use a scatter plot to illustrate that. And the third thing that we're going to use is a word cloud of the first letter of names. So what are the most popular first letters in names? We'll put together a word cloud for that. The next thing we're going to make is a stacked bar chart. And this will also, for a selection of names, illustrate what proportion of the population is each name. And the final thing that we're going to do is a line chart with a search bar. There's a second part to this tutorial. I know I promised 2 parts in the last one. It's going to end up being 3. So this is part 2, and part 2 has its own 2 parts. So we're going to make a line chart here, and we're going to select a name to do the line chart with. And then in the dashboard, we're going to turn that selection into an action. All right, so let's get started with our tree map. So tree maps are really fantastic. And what they are is usually a series of relatively sized rectangles that are fit together. So you get a big square, and they're like rectangles that represent the proportion of the data set that is whatever the variable is. They have their own internal axis. So what this means is that the Cartesian plane, the xy coordinates, don't mean a single thing. So the xy, the Cartesian coordinates like that, are not translated. So what that means for Tableau is that all of the variables end up in the marks and the filters, and nothing ends up in your columns. Let's see what that looks like when we look at Tableau. So we're going to open up a new sheet. And we are interested in the distribution of female names. You can do this with all names, but honestly, there's a lot of names in this data set, so I would encourage you to pick if you're going to do it for male names or female names. So first thing I'm going to have you do is drag the calc female names, calc female, to the color marks card. All right, and this gives us really nothing at all. And then drag the same calc female to the size marks card. All right, and then drag the names pill to the detail. And this breaks it all up. So this is what I mean, that the plane within here is not, it's completely internal. There's no XY. When there's no XY, nothing goes in your columns or rows. The whole visualization gets made here, just with the marks, just with the symbols, just with the, 5 types, 5 ways, just with your types, right? Okay, so if we hover over our tooltips here, we get everybody's name and how many times it appears in the data set. So we'll break down just a little bit by using the color That's how we got this gradation. We actually can take the color away, and everything is just the same color. This is really hard to read, and that's why you use the color there. You can go ahead and change the color if you want, play with it, all of that. We're going to do a little bit of changing the color later. All right, now I want us to think about our tooltips though. So we are going to click on our tooltip, and right now it's just the simple name, calc female, and then it tells us the total number. And if you think about this in terms of what you want to prioritize, and I want to prioritize that there have been this many of this name. So I'm going to revise this and say, since 1900, there have been, and then I'm going to go to the next line. And here is where I'm going to put in my sum and then my calc female. And actually, I believe you can insert the data source there, and then you don't have to type the whole thing out. And then I'm going to put in the names. And then I'm going to put an apostrophe S. You know, there have been 3 million Marys, right? So I want to think about what I want to prioritize here, and I actually want to prioritize the number. What I find really interesting is the fact that there have been just so many people named Mary. So I'm going to make that size 18. I'm going to keep it bold. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger than the original font. I'm going to make this size 14. The actual numbers don't matter, but making the font larger or bold does matter, because ultimately what you're doing with size and with font and with boldness is prioritizing information for your viewer. So by increasing the size or the boldness, then you are telling, hey, this is what I want you to pay attention to, and this is what's important. Okay, and then our tooltip looks a little bit better. You know, helps us see how many of each people we've had. Next thing I'm going to have you do is change the legend title. I'm just going to call it 100 Years of Female Names. And then come down here and change the name of the sheet, and I'm going to call it Tree Map. This will help when we're making our dashboard. While we're at it, on sheet 1, I'm going to rename, I'm going to rename this and call it dispersion plot. Okay, just dispersion. All I did was I realized that I still had this as named sheet 1, so I went over, changed it to dispersion, came back here, changed it to tree map. The last thing that we're going to do is remove these null values. These were values that were too small to appear in our tree map. What Tableau has done is it's given basically a cutoff. It looks like 11 is our smallest value. So if there are fewer than 11 people with a particular name in our data set, then Tableau cut it off for us because it's actually too small of a square to fit inside of here. And that's why you got all of those null values. Also, names that were only given to males aren't going to appear in here either. All right, so I encourage you for a fun exercise to duplicate this sheet and try to make the same tree map either with all male names, or use the filter on names to choose like movie stars or musicians, and make a tree map using a different set of names. But we're going to move on and make a scatter plot. So go ahead and make a new sheet. And on this sheet, we're going to show the relationship between the frequency that a name was used by gender. So if it's 50% female and 50% male, or if it's 100% female, 100% male, and the frequency with which a name was used overall. So I'm really showing two things on this plot. The first thing that I'm going to show is I want to illustrate how popular a name has been overall, and I'm going to illustrate that with size. And I want to illustrate what proportion of this name is male or female. And I'm going to indicate that with position. All right, and I'm going to re-encode that information with color, but mostly color is going to be used for styling. Okay, first thing is to drag the female percent to the rows and the calc male percent to the columns, and you should get just one dot over here. And then we're going to drag the occurrences to the size. All right, and then finally we're going to drag the name to the detail. And go ahead and add all members. It gives you a warning, but don't worry about it because it also has a ton of null values. Right now, I'm going to head and get rid of those null values. And I'm going to do it again. All right, excellent. And then I'm going to change the size of my dots. I want them to be a little bit larger just because it, I think, amplifies the distinctions that we see here. And we see a really interesting pattern, right? The names in the middle, the names that are about at 50%, are really quite small. But the names at the very ends, like Mary or David or James, are very, very large. And this is likely because the more gendered the name, the more likely that name is to be used, is what we can take away from this. And the less gendered the name, the less likely that name is to be used. So if a name could be given equally to a male or a female, then it is much less popular. Whereas if a name clearly indicates the gender, then it is much popular, at least for some of these really, really popular names like James, David, Charles, those types of names. All right, we could stop here, but we could make it just a little bit better. So I'm going to drag the calc female percent to the color. And this gives me a gradation based on the most female to the least female. Now that doesn't actually make sense for the data set that we're looking at here, but what would make sense is if we click on color and we look for one of these colors that's a bipolar, that it has two color extremes. My personal favorite is the sunrise sunset diverging. You can use whatever color schema that you like, so long as it's a color scheme that has two colors on opposite ends. So orange to blue, red to green diverging, any of the diverging color schemas. All right, I'm going to keep with my sunrise sunset and apply that. And then here we have females are very, very pink and males are very, very blue. We might want to consider that, but I'm so in love with this color scheme that we'll just deal with the fact that males are pink and females are blue. Cool, excellent. You know how to rename your sheet, so we're not going to do that. The one thing that I would like us to do is to change the axis titles to female and male. And the way that you do that is you just double click on the axis and you can change it from change the labels, right? And I'm going to remove the tick marks because ultimately I don't necessarily care what proportion of the data set is male or female. What I care is to just show this visualization. So I'm going to right click here. I'm going to edit my axis, and I'm going to select over here on tick marks, none. Okay. And then I'll do the same on the other side. This is completely a matter of personal preference. You can keep your tick marks if what you're trying to communicate is the proportion. What I'm trying to communicate here is an overall trend in the data. I would consider removing the axis lines as well, which you can do by right-clicking and removing or adding, or however you like. Okay, so you have over here a legend. I'm going to change this legend title. I'm going to select Edit Title. There was just the little drop down over there. And I'm just going to call it, I'm going to call this Frequency. And I'm actually going to remove this legend. And I'm just going to unselect, or I'm going to hit Hide Card, because I don't necessarily want to show that on here. Again, what I'm trying to get at here is an overall feeling for the data as opposed to a really strict quantitative measure. I may even consider removing this legend as well. Excellent. Now, go ahead and play around with this. I mean, it can be really fun to figure out which names are which. You might want to add a detail point here saying if there is a name that's 50-50, you might want to highlight that one, the one that is the closest to the middle point, which might actually be Carrie, interestingly. Okay, if you did want to annotate Carrie, Adrian, nope. Then you would right click and then select Annotate. So you just right click on a point, select Annotate, and then you can annotate that point. And then you say, you know, Carrie is the most balanced name. And then you get your annotation there. These annotations often can really help to scaffold your story and give your reader an idea of what they should be paying attention to within your data set. All right, so we are going to continue to move on, and we are going to go ahead and make a word cloud. So, I forgot to rename my sheet. Go down here, rename your sheet, and call it line chart or scatter chart. Actually a scatter plot. Okay, we'll make a new sheet here. This one is going to be a word cloud. Word clouds, you know, you're going to hear me say this again, but I have mixed feelings about them. They're really awful ways to show data. I don't really know how I should read the proportion of a name like Penelope versus a name like Da. You know, how are they sized to represent what proportion of which one is more prevalent in the data? You see where I'm going with this. Words are not good tools to show relative proportions. However, they are an excellent way to offer a quick snapshot into the data, and quite honestly, they have kind of a cool effect. So ultimately, even though they don't necessarily show proportion very well in a mathematical way, they do show proportion in a particularly qualitative way pretty well. Personally, my own style, I like to make word clouds of the first letters of things whenever it's possible. One, because it's a little bit easier for me to compare one letter to another letter. And two, because it always looks just kind of cool and a little bit edgy. Again, this is a personal style thing, but we're going to go ahead and make a word cloud with the first letters. Obviously, you could do this with first names as well. This data set is too big, so you'd have to select a proportion of the names. Okay, so we are going to first drag our calc first letter to the text marks card. And then you just get an alphabet here, right? And then you could, from here, add a tooltip saying, this is 30% of the data, and that would be great. But we are then going to drag our calc first letter to size. And what this does is it means that every single letter is going to be sized based on how frequently it occurs. Well, each letter occurs one time, so that's not particularly helpful. So on this size button here, on the size card, click on the drop down, and then we are going to change it from a dimension into a measure. And the measure we're going to be is going to be the count. And then that turned it into a tree map. And while this in and of itself is really cool, and you might want to play around with this tree map a little bit, and notice that X is the least common letter to start a name with, we're aiming to get a word cloud. So we're going to go over here to automatic, and we're going to select text. And here we have a word cloud of the most common first letters for this entire data set. And it looks like, S, L, R, M, these are each the most common. But it would be really nice to keep a uniform color palette going throughout our whole workbook. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag the calc female percent over to color. All right. And what this does is it puts it on that same gradient that we had when we were doing our line chart. So I'm going to go over here to color. I'm going to go to edit colors. And last time I chose sunrise, sunset. And I'm going to do the same this time. Click apply and then OK. And then we have this nice visualization that encodes this extra little snippet of information, which is the female percent. So, what percent of female names begin with A? This isn't actually that great of a visualization together. Here, color is again just really being used as an accent, is the best way to think of it, because ultimately the way that color gets translated in this way is a little bit weird, but it gives us a nice consistent palette, even though it doesn't really mean anything. All right, you might be asking yourself about now, this is great, but how would I make a word cloud of just female first names, right? All right. Well, we are going to go over here and we are going to make a new variable. So I know that we have done a ton of calculating new variables, but we're going to do one more here. So we're going to go and click on this button and you realize, wow, this is a great word cloud, but I really want it to be just about females or just about males. So we'll go here to do create calculated word cloud, or create calculated field, and we'll call this field calc female first letter. All right, and then we'll use our if-then statement again. So if the sex is female, then we want to take the left first letter of the name and end. So we'll go ahead and apply that, and there is an error. Left name, comma 1. Oh, that's because there's no such thing as name like that, right? Okay, then left name 1. We'll apply that, click OK. Excellent. Now, if we just wanted our word cloud about females, we would drag these off and move the calc female first letter over here to the size, and calc female first letter to the text. And then we will change the calc female first letter from the dimension to being a measure and have it be a count. All right, so, and from here, you'll go ahead and give it a different title, maybe a first letter or dominance of first letter in female names, something like that. And we'll call this our word cloud down here at the bottom. All right, we are going to move on and add a new sheet, and this one is going to be our stacked bar chart. All right, so the first thing that I'd like you to do is drag name to the filters and select 5 different names. I'm going to select Antonios. None. Right. So first select none, and then I'm going to select Antonio, and then Kelly, Kiana, Maria, which I have to scroll down for, Michelle, and finally Devin, my wife, because she has a really interesting name. Excellent. So go ahead and click apply and then OK. The reason being we only want 6 bars, not 3,000. You cannot make a bar chart with 3,000 columns because no one will be able to read it. So we are going to then drag the name to the columns and the number of occurrences to the rows. All right, and what we see here is just a regular bar chart, and this is the raw counts for each name. We see that Kelly, Maria, and Michelle are disproportionately more popular than Antonio, Devin, or Kiana. All right. So we also want to break this up by sex. So we want to know like what proportion of the total is male or female. So I'm going to drag sex over to color. And here we have fantastic, the breakdown by gender, but we still don't have our 100% stacked bar chart. So we still can't see the proportion. So the way to get that is to go up here to the occurrences up in the rows and then go down to add table calculation. And here we're going to go percent of total in our calculation type. And since we have a vertical bar chart, we'll go table down. Right? And now if we close this dialog box, we see that we have the proportions. We also see that Tableau very helpfully organized these no longer in alphabetical order, but according to the proportion of male, like the prevalence of this name for males. If you wanted to visualize it in the other order, the way you'd do that is you'd go over here and click on the vertical axis, and then you can order, if you click on these like stacked bar charts here, to order them the other way. All right, excellent, congratulations. So from here you can change, I would remove this, remove the name, just hide the labels for the columns. You can go ahead and change the name of this axis, give your visualization a name, and then come down here and rename this sheet to bar. All right, we are continuing to move on. We are going to go and do the very last one, is our line chart. So I'm going to make one more worksheet, and In this one, we're going to see the change in a name over time based on the gender it's assigned to. So is this name more popular with males or is it more popular with females over time? And time can be, as we discussed in class, can be thought of as continuous or discrete. But we're going to use a line because we're going to think about time as being a continuous variable, something that exists over this period of time. All right, so again, we're going to need to filter by name. So go ahead and drag the name pill to the filter card. And we really can only pick one to start. This is going to be the one that is the default in our data set. I'm going to pick Devin again because it's actually really interesting in how it's changed over time. You are welcome to pick your name or a different name. I'm just picking Devin because it shows kind of a cool pattern. Okay, so I've filtered my data set to find only the name Devin. And, you know, we are going ultimately to let our user choose, but even in letting your user choose, you still have to have something there as the default. Okay, so we're going to drag the year to the columns because we want our year to be represented on our x-axis because it's moving through time. And then we're going to drag occurrences to the rows. And it automatically fills in a line chart for us. If it doesn't automatically fill in a line chart, go ahead and select that from here. All right, and now we're going to drag sex to color. And this is what will give us two lines here, one for representing males and one for representing females. I kind of hate those two colors. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to pick the summer. Now, still, it's given me this lavender and whatever. So if I click on the F here, and I click on that teal, and I click on the M here, and I click on the orange, it'll assign those colors based on whatever I clicked on. I also hate that palette, so I'm going to call female pink and male green. All right, click apply, and then click OK. And we have a nice line graph here that shows the distribution of Devin over time. It was a somehow not very common name until it became way more common among males. And in 1978, it has this spike among females. All right, so you can go ahead and change the title, change the axis labels, probably occurrences is fine, but maybe something a little bit less formal. You don't need the word year here, that should be assumed. You do need this key over here to tell you which one is female, and I would change the formatting of the tooltips ultimately. All right, in the next tutorial, we are going to turn this visualization and give the user some control by turning this filter into an action. All right, until then, go ahead and rename this sheet down here line. Save your work, as we should have done earlier, and I'll see you in the next lab. All right, good luck. Enjoy.